It starts with nothing more than a request, simple, unassuming, the kind of thing anyone else would handle in seconds without a second glance. But this isn't just anyone, and they all see it before she even speaks. The color of her skin draws out something quiet and vicious behind polite smiles, and what should have been routine becomes an interrogation. Papers are scrutinized, words sharpened into insults disguised as questions, laughter bubbles where there should be service. They think she's powerless, that their authority is untouchable, that humiliating her is a game without consequences. But buried in those cheap clothes and quiet eyes is the power to bring down everything they've built on arrogance and contempt. Want to see how far they fall? Like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Let's see if you're ready for the moment they realize exactly who they tried to deny. Linnell Porter trudged across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, her sneakers slapping the ground with each step, the chill of the early morning biting through the thin gray sweatshirt she'd worn too many times to count. She paused outside the bank's gleaming glass doors, caught a glimpse of her reflection, exhausted brown eyes, dry lips pressed tight, hair scraped back in a simple ponytail, and braced herself. Inside, the air was cool and dry, filled with a hushed murmur of conversations and the rhythmic hum of counting machines. She joined the line, clutching her scuffed leather wallet so hard her knuckles whitened. She rehearsed in her head, "Speak clearly, be polite, don't let them see how nervous you are." When her turn came, Wyatt Griggs didn't even bother to hide his contempt. He looked up lazily, his eyes crawling over her clothes before snapping back to her face. "You sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his voice so loud that the older couple behind her turned to look. She swallowed. "I'm here to withdraw from my business account, Porter Holdings." He let out a barking laugh that startled the nearby teller. "Hey Vic," he shouted over his shoulder, not caring about the growing attention. "We got another one who thinks she's a CEO." Snickers rose from the line. Linnell's mouth went dry, but she forced the words out. "It's my account. I have ID." She held it out with trembling fingers. Wyatt took it with exaggerated care, as though afraid he'd catch something from her touch. He flipped it under the desk lamp, twisting it theatrically. "Porter Holdings," he drawled. "That's cute. You sure you didn't just make that up in your cousin's basement?" The laughter from the line grew sharper, more vicious. Linnell felt her face flush hot. She couldn't meet their eyes. "Please," she said quietly, "just check the account." Wyatt made a show of examining the ID. "You're really killing me here," he said. "Vic, you better come see this." Victoria Clay emerged from the glass office in crisp navy and heels that clicked menacingly on the floor. Her eyes took in the scene. Wyatt's smirk, Linnell's hunched shoulders, the onlookers leaning in for the drama. She didn't look at Wyatt. She looked at Linnell, slowly, up and down. "Problem?" she asked, voice honey poison. Wyatt gave a one-shoulder shrug. "She says she's withdrawing from this big fancy account." "I dunno." Victoria arched her brow. "Porter Holdings?" She said it like a joke. Linnell forced herself to nod. "Yes, I'm the owner." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Huh, and how much are you trying to withdraw today, Ms. CEO?" The words dripped sarcasm. Linnell blinked back tears. "Enough," she said, voice cracking. Victoria leaned in. "Enough? That's not an answer. We need a number." She glanced at Wyatt. "Or is this just another charity case wasting our time?" Wyatt chuckled. "Might be. She's dressed for it." Linnell's ears roared. She swallowed hard. "Please. My ID. My card. It's all there." Victoria took it between two fingers like it was soiled. "We'll see about that." She squinted at the card before tossing it back onto the counter, watching it slide toward Linnell's clenched fist. "We'll need more. Something real. Business license. Tax ID. Something that proves you are who you say." Linnell's hands shook as she rummaged through her worn bag. Papers spilled out, notes, receipts, a pack of tissues. She heard someone behind her sigh loudly. "Jesus, can you hurry up?" She fumbled the manila folder onto the counter. Victoria flipped through it like junk mail. Uh-huh. Cute. Wyatt, do you buy this?" Wyatt snorted. "Looks homemade." The line laughed again. Linnell felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked furiously. "It's real," she whispered. "Check your system." Victoria leaned so close Linnell could smell her perfume. "We are checking. And for everyone's safety, we're going to do it properly." She pressed the security button. Wyatt smirked. Victoria's grin widened at the silence. She picked up Linnell's ID between two fingers, holding it out at arm's length like it smelled bad, then turned it over under the fluorescent light theatrically, tilting it as though checking for forgeries. She let out a bored sigh. "Wyatt, you seeing this? Looks like someone printed this at home." Wyatt let out an appreciative snort and leaned over to grab the card from her. He held it to the light, squinting. "I dunno, Vic kinda looks like a third grader's art project." He twisted to face the line, grinning. "Anyone else see this? Maybe she needs crayons instead of pen." The laughter came in ripples this time, cautious at first, then bolder. Someone actually clapped, and a man near the door lifted his phone, pretending to check messages but clearly recording. Linnell's vision blurred. She blinked the tears back violently. She wasn't going to cry. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Her fingers tightened around the counter's edge so hard they hurt. She forced her voice to come out, low and cracking. "Please. It's my account. Just process the withdrawal." Victoria's expression didn't change except for the briefest flash of satisfaction at the break in Linnell's voice. She laid the ID back on the counter with a soft, dismissive tap. "You think we're going to just take your word for it? With what's in that account? You're going to need to sign again." She slid a new form over with the edge of her manicured nail. Linnell's hand shook as she picked up the cheap bank pen. The first signature was ragged, the letters crowding each other in her frantic rush to be done. Wyatt snatched it up before she even set the pen down. "Oof," he said loudly, displaying it to Victoria and turning it so the line could see. "That's barely English. Vic, can you even read this?" Victoria didn't bother glancing at Linnell. She took the form, pursed her lips, then dropped it. "Do it again. Neater this time. We have to be sure you can actually write your name." Wyatt leered. Maybe she can't. The words were casual, tossed out like a cigarette, but they landed with precision. Someone in line laughed in an ugly bark. A woman whispered she should have stayed home, and her friend giggled behind her. Linnell felt heat crawling up her neck, her ears ringing with a dull roar. She picked up the pen again, forced herself to slow her hand, even though the trembling wouldn't stop. She finished and slid it back. Wyatt snatched it with exaggerated care, like it might bite him. "Vic, any better?" Victoria pretended to scrutinize it. "Barely. One more time." She pushed another form over. The lobby had fallen quiet again, but not in any sympathetic way. It was the hush of people enjoying a show, not wanting to miss a word. Linnell couldn't lift her eyes. She signed again, her breathing shallow, chest tight. Her vision swam, tears threatening to drop onto the paper. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve and forced the pen down harder. Wyatt lifted the paper. "I dunno, Vic. She says she owns a company but can't even sign the same way twice." Victoria finally turned her gaze back to Linnell, her smile sharp. "That's the thing about big accounts. They need big security. You wouldn't understand." She raised her voice a notch, making sure the watching customers heard every word. "We can't just hand over thousands, oh wait, millions, to anyone with a fake ID and some printouts." Linnell opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. She felt her face crumble for half a second before she turned away, trying to hold it in. Wyatt let out a sigh like he was bored. "Dalton, you mind standing a little closer? Make sure she doesn't bolt." Dalton didn't speak. He just stepped forward until Linnell could feel the heat from his uniformed bulk at her shoulder. She flinched. He didn't move. The man with the phone in the back adjusted his angle. She heard the soft chime of another video starting. She wished she could vanish. Victoria watched her, eyes cold, smile gone. She picked up Linnell's stack of papers again, thumbing through them slowly, pausing to tisk at the creased edges. "Better come make sure everyone is safe," she called, her voice sweet as poison honey. The words cut into Linnell with surgical precision, stripping away every last pretense of dignity she tried to keep. Dalton Kersey pushed himself off the wall he'd been leaning against, his face unreadable, but his presence undeniable. He moved like a tank on patrol, his boots heavy and deliberate as he closed the distance between them. He settled beside Linnell, towering over her until the fluorescent lights bounced off his polished badge and the black grip of the taser at his hip. His hand dropped casually, deliberately, to rest on the handle. Linnell's stomach turned cold. He didn't say anything at first, just let his shadow fall across her as Victoria pressed a hand to her own chest in a theatrical show of concern. "We don't want any trouble from you, ma'am," Dalton finally said, his voice a low growl that rolled across the counter like distant thunder. His tone was flat, but loud enough to make sure everyone heard it, loud enough to shift the energy in the room from cruel laughter to something sharper, meaner. Linnell's mouth went dry. She forced herself to look at Dalton's face, searching for anything human behind the cold mask of authority. "I'm not causing trouble," she said hoarsely, the words scraping her throat raw. "I just want to make my withdrawal. That's all I want." She hated how her voice cracked at the end, but she couldn't help it. Every nerve in her body felt like it was on fire. Dalton didn't blink. He didn't move. His fingers tapped once on the taser before he settled back into stillness. "Then do what you're told," he said. Victoria let out a dramatic sigh of relief, clasping her hands in front of her like a scolding schoolteacher finally calming the class. "See," she said brightly, turning her attention back to the watching crowd, drawing them in like an actress playing to her audience. "Everything's fine, as long as our guest cooperates." Wyatt, meanwhile, had never taken his eyes off Linnell. He had been watching her with that same reptilian amusement, and now he seemed to sense blood in the water. He leaned forward on the counter, voice dropping into a mocking imitation of her earlier plea. "Please, it's my count," he whined, pitching his voice high and thin like a child pretending to cry. "I just want my money." He sniffled theatrically and wiped an imaginary tear. The sound of laughter exploded around them. It was uglier now, freer, emboldened by the threat of Dalton standing behind her and the smirk on Victoria's face. Phones were out again. Linnell could see the telltale red lights of recording apps shining from low angles, catching her face flushed red, her eyes shining with tears she couldn't blink away fast enough. She tried to speak, but Wyatt cut her off immediately, raising his hand like a traffic cop while not breaking his smirk. He snapped. "Your turn's over. You had your chance to do this the easy way." He picked up the forms she'd signed and held them up for the crowd. "Look at this. Is this even the same signature? Maybe she can't write her own name." He turned to Victoria. "What do you think, boss? Should we get her a tutor?" Victoria didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched. "She'll sign it again," she said, "if she wants anything at all today." She slapped another blank form on the counter, letting it flutter once before it landed, the sound sharp in the silence that followed the laughter. Linnell stared at the paper, her chest rising and falling too quickly. She reached for it with numb fingers. Dalton shifted behind her, just enough to make sure she remembered he was there. His belt creaked with emotion, the leather stretching against the thick material of his uniform. The sound made her jump. Wyatt let out a snort of derision. "You see that? She's twitchy. Guilty conscience maybe." Someone in the line yelled, "Maybe she's high," and another voice responded with cruel delight, "Don't taste her, bro," which sent another round of laughter rippling through the room. Linnell's vision blurred. She tried to keep her breathing even, but the sob that had been building in her chest escaped in a strangled gasp. She clapped a hand over her mouth to smother the sound, the other hand shaking so hard the pen fell from her grip and clattered on the counter. "So, Wyatt, were you thinking for lunch today?" she asked. Wyatt leaned back on his stool, folding his arms behind his head with a theatrical stretch. "I dunno, Vic. Maybe that new place across the street? They got those sliders. Kind of expensive, though," he said with a pointed look at Linnell, without actually acknowledging her. Victoria laughed lightly, turning it into a cruel little song that danced in the hush of the lobby. "Yeah, you gotta have the right kind of money for that," she agreed. She snapped her fingers, startling Linnell into blinking back hot tears. Victoria gestured lazily at the stack of papers. "Oh, right. The big withdrawal," she said, her voice dripping sarcasm so thick it made the word itself sound filthy. She picked up the form, scanned it for half a second without reading, then set it aside with a sigh. "You sure these aren't forged?" "Hard to tell," she mused aloud, making sure her voice carried. Wyatt snorted. "Looks like crayon to me," he said. He reached over and flicked another form off the counter entirely so it fluttered to the floor at Linnell's feet. She stared at it numbly before stooping to pick it up, moving stiffly so Dalton didn't think she was trying to run. Her fingers shook so badly she dropped it once before managing to get it back into the pile. The sound of shuffling and whispers behind her grew louder. She could hear one woman muttering, "My God, can you believe this?" to her friend, who only gave a dismissive hum, eyes glued to the unfolding spectacle like it was a free show. Victoria was busy tapping on her terminal in the most lackadaisical fashion imaginable, her other hand twirling a pen between her fingers. "Processing," she announced in a bored voice, rolling her eyes at Wyatt. So much processing for this kind of request. She leaned closer to her screen, squinting dramatically. "Oh no," she said in mock horror. "Look at that. Flagged for fraud review." Linnell's head jerked up, eyes wide. "What?" she croaked, the words strangled by the tightness in her throat. Victoria raised her eyebrows with a mock concerned frown. "System saying something's fishy," she said sweetly. "Could be a mistake, though." "Maybe." Wyatt let out an exaggerated groan. "You know the type, Vic. They always say it's a mistake." He tilted his head toward the line behind Linnell, inviting them in on the joke. "Yeah, mistake as she thought she was going to walk out with cash that big." Someone behind Linnell actually laughed, a sharp bray that cut through her chest. Another voice said, "Check her pockets. Probably has a printer in there." That one sent a ripple of giggles through the line. Dalton remained stoic, eyes forward, but he shifted minutely closer, his belt clinking. The small motion was enough to send a tremor through Linnell's body. She tried to hold herself together, but her knees threatened to buckle. She swallowed hard, trying to remember how to speak. "Please," she whispered, hating how her voice trembled. "Please, just look up the account. You can see it's real. You can see my name." Victoria didn't even look at her. She clicked something on her screen with deliberate slowness. She said vaguely. "We're looking. Gotta be thorough." She turned back to Wyatt and grinned. "God forbid we accidentally give away our money." Wyatt threw his head back and laughed. "Yeah, the shareholders would be pissed," he said. He leaned forward, tapping the glass barrier with his knuckle for emphasis. "You sure you're not on welfare? Maybe that's what you meant to withdraw." The words hit Linnell like a slap. She winced visibly, which only made Wyatt's grin widen, teeth flashing. She tried again. "I have the account number. My business documents." "You took them." "Please," she rasped. Her voice sounded so small in the cavernous lobby. Victoria finally deigned to glance her way, one eyebrow raised. "What this?" She picked up the manila folder Linnell had painstakingly collected. She pinched the edge and let the papers fall out onto the counter in a messy heap. Receipts, licenses, registrations all slid and scattered, a sea of proof they refused to see. Victoria nudged a few aside with her pen, smearing one with black ink. "Guess you'll have to reorganize that," she said lightly. "Can't read it like this." Wyatt clapped once, sarcastically. "Bravo. Really professional." He glanced over at the growing line, as if rallying them to his side. "Sorry, folks. This might take a while. She's got a lot of explaining to do." A man in work boots let out an impatient huff. "You gonna move her along, or what?" he said, loud enough to make Linnell's stomach lurch. Victoria flashed him a customer service smile. "Soon as we finish security," she cooed. She turned back to Linnell, dropping her voice into something cold and hard. "You see, you can't just walk in here and demand money like you're entitled to it. We have to check people like you." Linnell felt her nails biting into her palms so hard they might draw blood. Victoria flicked her gaze up and caught sight of the growing line, the simmering impatience bubbling there, and lifted her chin with an air of self-satisfied authority. She pressed another button under the counter and said almost sing-song, "Franklin, could you come out front? We're going to need a decision on this one." Linnell felt her heart twist painfully. She knew what that tone meant. It was the sound of escalation, not resolution. Around her, the crowd fell quiet, the mood shifting from open mockery to something colder, anticipatory, the way people hush when they sense a fight about to get broken up or get worse. A moment later, Franklin Tate emerged from the back hallway, his dark gray suit perfectly pressed, his hair slicked back with meticulous precision. He was the face they showed to important clients, the one they sent holiday baskets to, the one who smiled in marketing photos. He didn't smile now. He didn't even glance at Linnell as he approached. His eyes went straight to Victoria and Wyatt, assessing them with brisk efficiency like a foreman checking the work of lazy apprentices. "Problem?" he asked in a voice that was too calm, too measured, the calm of someone who had been through this before and already knew how it would end. Victoria didn't miss a beat. She turned the monitor slightly in his direction, tapping it once. Possible fraud alert. Large withdrawal request. Questionable documentation. Signature issues. Each word dropped with icy precision, carefully chosen to sound objective while dripping with accusation. Wyatt snickered and added, "We've been real patient, boss. She just can't seem to prove it's hers." Franklin didn't even dignify Wyatt's tone with a look. He let the silence stretch a beat too long before exhaling through his nose, a subtle but unmistakable signal of exasperation. Then, still not looking at Linnell, he said, "Clear her out." The words landed like a gavel. Linnell felt her spine lock, the breath catching in her throat. She blinked, her mouth working before sound would come out. "What? No, please, I'm just asking for my money. It's my account. I can show you everything. Just look at it, please." Her voice cracked so hard the last word broke in half. Franklin didn't even flinch. He adjusted the cuffs of his jacket with deliberate calm, then added, still not meeting her eyes, "No funds released today. Market for hold and review." Wyatt straightened slightly, his grin feral now that he had official blessing. Victoria let out a small breath of satisfaction, clicking her pen once more with finality. "You heard him," she said brightly. "Accounts on hold. Nothing's moving today." She glanced at Dalton. "Escort her outside." Dalton nodded once, his hand resting on the taser grip in a casual threat. But Franklin wasn't done. He finally let his eyes slide toward Linnell, not meeting them directly, but skimming over her like she was an unidentifiable stain on the floor. His lip curled in something approaching a sneer. "Tell her to come back with someone who can vouch for her," he said, voice dripping with the smug satisfaction of someone sure he wouldn't be challenged. He waved one hand dismissively in her direction, like he was shooing a dog. "We don't just hand out millions to anyone who walks in off the street." The phrase burned its way into her ears, searing itself into memory with cruel clarity. Anyone, off the street. It was all there in the way he said it, the weight behind the casual cruelty. The lobby was silent except for the distant shuffle of someone repositioning for a better view. The tension in the air was thick enough to chew. Wyatt cleared his throat dramatically, breaking the moment. "You heard the man," he said, leaning forward with glee. "Maybe bring your manager next time." "Huh? Or your parole officer." A ragged laugh broke from someone in the line, more nervous than before, but no less real. Victoria held out the folder of jumbled papers and IDs, pinching it between two fingers like it was toxic waste. She let it dangle in front of Linnell's face. "Here," she said flatly. "You're done for today. Try again when you're ready to be serious." Linnell stared at the folder. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but her hands refused to move. Her legs felt rooted to the floor, cold and leaden. It was Dalton's looming presence that finally snapped her back. His breath was close, too close, and she could feel the expectation radiating from him. She snatched the folder with trembling fingers, clutching it to her chest, so hard the papers crumpled under her grip. Franklin turned away without another word, already done with her existence, heading back to his office like a surgeon leaving a corpse on the table. Victoria watched him go with something like reverence before snapping her gaze back to Linnell. She tried to speak, tried to say something, anything, that might make them stop, make them see her, but the words tangled like knots in her mouth, dry and strangled before they could escape. Wyatt's voice rang out from behind the counter in a bright, mocking sing-song. "Hey, don't steal anything on the way out," he called, his words slicing through the tense hush of the lobby like a serrated blade. The line erupted in laughter, some of it harsh and barking, others nervous titters that carried the unmistakable glee of people relieved they weren't the ones being humiliated. Linnell felt the heat flood her face, felt the shame crawl over her skin like a rash she couldn't scrub away. She flinched as if struck, her whole body recoiling, but Dalton's grip kept her moving, steering her inexorably forward. Victoria didn't say anything, didn't even look at her now, as if Linnell had ceased to exist entirely the moment she was no longer profitable or entertaining. Wyatt kept up his performance though, leaning over the counter, waving exaggeratedly like a clown at a carnival. "Bye now," he crowed. "Come back when you've learned to spell your own name." The words twisted in her gut like a knife, carving out every last scrap of dignity she'd fought to hold onto. She lowered her head, hair slipping free from its frayed elastic to curtain her face, hiding her tears that finally fell unchecked, hot and humiliating against her clammy skin. The lobby fell back into a hushed murmur as Dalton pushed open the door with his free hand, the quiet punctuated by the squeak of the hinges and the rush of cold wind that slapped her in the face as she stumbled over the threshold. He let go only when she was fully outside, the sudden absence of his grip almost enough to make her fall forward onto the concrete. She staggered, catching herself at the last second with her free hand, the folder of crumpled, ink-smeared documents still clutched to her chest like a shield made of paper and broken pride. The door swung shut behind her with a final dismissive thud that seemed to seal her out of the world she'd just been expelled from. For a moment she stood frozen on the sidewalk, blinking at the harsh afternoon light, the world spinning around her in a dizzying blur of color and sound that felt a million miles away. Cars passed on the street with indifferent roars. Pedestrians walked by with heads bent over their phones or tucked into scarves against the wind, none of them sparing her a second glance except for one boy in a bright red hoodie standing a few feet away. He held his phone up in front of his face, the camera pointed directly at her, his thumb tapping the screen with practiced speed. She saw the glow of the screen through her tears, saw the words appear in big white letters at the bottom of the live recording. "Scammer gets caught." She realized with a sick, plunging horror that he was live streaming her breakdown to an audience of strangers. His face split in a grin that held no warmth or pity. Her breath hitched violently in her chest. She opened her mouth to tell him to stop, but no sound came out. She watched helplessly as he turned slightly to get a better angle, capturing the tear tracks on her face, the trembling of her hands, the devastation in her eyes. His fingers flew over the screen, adding hashtags with gleeful efficiency. Hashtag scammer, hashtag caught on camera, hashtag bank fraud. Linnell's vision went watery, the whole world reduced to shapes and shadows. She heard the buzz of her own phone from inside her pocket, vibrating over and over, a relentless wasp's sting against her hip. She fumbled for it, finally pulling it free with shaking fingers, the screen lighting up with a cascade of notifications she couldn't even process. Comments flooded in already. Some were laughing emojis. Some were words she couldn't bear to read fully. Typical. Get a job. Come back with someone to vouch. Scammer. Outside, the street hummed with the oblivious life of people who didn't know her name and wouldn't care if they did, their eyes sliding over her hunched figure like she was just another piece of wind-blown trash on the cracked concrete. She tripped on a raised section of sidewalk, nearly falling, managing only by miracle to keep the folder from spilling its pathetic contents across the gutter. The sting of embarrassment was sharp enough to make fresh tears spring to her eyes. Tears she wiped away with her sleeve so fiercely it burned her skin. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Another notification, another hateful comment from the video the teenager had filmed, the words crawling across her vision even though she refused to open the message. Scammer gets caught. LOL pathetic. Cry more. She squeezed the cheap plastic of the old flip phone so hard it creaked. She wanted to scream. She wanted to turn around and throw the bank's door open so hard the glass shattered and demand they see her, really see her, for the first time all day. But she knew she couldn't. Her chest hitched with another breath that felt like drowning. Instead, she kept walking until she reached the edge of the parking lot, her back to the bank, the wind tugging at her hair, her clothes, trying to pull her apart at the seams. She stood there trembling, alone in the harsh gray daylight that seemed to flatten everything around her into the same dull hopelessness. And then, slowly, she exhaled, long controlled. She forced the air out until the shaking subsided enough that she could move. Her fingers opened with painful stiffness, and she flipped open the old phone with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel in the empty air. The plastic was cracked at the hinge. The screen flickered before settling. She scrolled to a single contact. The name was just 4 letters, Exec. Her thumb hovered for a second as she felt the wind tear at her hair, lifting it like ghost fingers, and then she pressed call. It rang once, twice, then clicked over. A calm voice answered immediately. Go. She closed her eyes, fighting the way her throat threatened to close around the words. She made herself say them anyway. Quiet, precise, unyielding. It's time. Pull every last cent. There was no hesitation on the line, only a single, flat reply. Understood. And then the call ended. She closed the phone slowly, the hinge making a soft, decisive click as it shut. She exhaled again, her breath visible in the cold air. She didn't move, didn't run, didn't wipe the tears that still clung to her lashes. Behind her, the bank continued to function for 1 heartbeat, 2, oblivious to the sentence she had just pronounced. Inside, Wyatt was laughing at something Victoria said, still leaning over the counter like a smug gargoyle. Dalton had settled back into his station, tapping at his phone like nothing had happened. Another day, another problem thrown out onto the street. Franklin was back in his glass-walled office, talking on his headset with board authority about Q4 targets and customer experience initiatives. The line still shuffled forward, grumbling about wait times. Half the customers still sharing videos on their phones of the woman who'd been thrown out, showing each other with giggles the humiliating footage of her stammering, crying, begging. And then the system screamed. It started as a single, shrill alarm, the kind that usually meant a printer jam or a paper refill. But it didn't stop. Screens went black, flickered, returned to life with stark red text. Alert. Fraud detected. Alert. Funds transfer. Alert. Wyatt froze mid-laugh, his eyes jerking to his monitor. It filled with line after line of code he couldn't read. Error messages cascading like digital rain. Victoria spun on her heel, her grin falling away like a mask dropped on stage, revealing stark, unvarnished panic. She lunged for her keyboard, fingers rattling over the keys, her carefully manicured nails clacking like claws. He punched keys with panicked, random jabs that produced only angry error tones. Vic, it's really going, he stammered, voice thin and cracking. It's all of it. It's all the money. Victoria rounded on him with feral fury, eyes wild. I can see that, Wyatt. Do something, she snapped. Her fingers were white on the edge of the desk. She turned to the IT tech who'd run from the back, a skinny kid with a headset askew, sweat beading on his forehead as he stabbed at his laptop. Override it, she shouted, voice going high and ragged. Roll it back. The tech was nearly hyperventilating. I can't. It's already verified. It's an authorized transfer. I can't reverse it without the originator's approval. His voice cracked on the last word, and he recoiled as Victoria let out a screech that was half a curse and half an inarticulate wail of rage. Franklin Tate crashed back into the scene, tie askew, his face an unhealthy red, headset dangling uselessly around his neck. He was yelling into his office phone, so hard spit flew. I don't care if you have to cut the wire. Kill it. Kill the transfer now. But the person on the other end couldn't help him. Their largest account, their single biggest source of leverage prestige, their bulletproof badge of legitimacy, was disappearing in real time, the numbers ticking down like a bomb they couldn't disarm. $5.9 billion. Not million. Billion. A figure so large even the corporate insurance policies would only cover pennies on the dollar of the damage it would inflict. And worse than the financial loss was the shame, the scandal already gestating like a monstrous egg about to hatch in the headlines. Wyatt clapped both hands to his head, letting out a high, childish sound that wasn't quite a scream. "We're screwed," he babbled, turning in a full circle like a cornered animal. "We're dead. They're going to fire us. They're going to." "Shut up," Victoria shrieked, but it was too late to reassert authority. The customers in line, some of whom had laughed earlier at Linnell's humiliation, now watched with wide-eyed fascination, phones out, recording every second. The schadenfreude was unmistakable in their smirks. One man muttered, "I should move my account," earning a bark of helpless laughter from someone behind him. Franklin's eyes bulged as he threw the office phone down, so hard it bounced off the desk and clattered to the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at Victoria and Wyatt, spittle flecking his lips. "Get her back. Find her," he roared. "Get her on the phone, on the street. I don't care. Get her." Wyatt lurched toward the doors, slamming into them hard enough to rattle the glass in the frame. He shoved them open with both hands, breath pluming in ragged clouds in the cold air as he staggered onto the sidewalk. He scanned frantically, head whipping side to side, hair disheveled and sweat damp. "Hey," he shouted, voice cracking with real, primal fear now. "Hey, lady, come back." Outside, Linnell stood at the edge of the sidewalk. She'd stopped walking only when she felt the last vibration of her phone go still in her pocket. She turned slowly at the sound of his voice, moving like something carved from granite, her hair tangled in the wind, her tear-streaked face dry now, but marked by the salt of her grief and rage. Her eyes met Wyatt's, and for the first time that day, he looked afraid of her. Not because of what she might do physically, no one watching would have ever believed she could be a threat in that way, but because of the absolute certainty in her gaze, the unshakable knowledge that the game had ended and he'd lost. Victoria burst out behind him, voice cracking with desperation. Wait," she shouted, heels clicking and skidding on the concrete. "Listen to me, we can fix this." Linnell didn't move to meet them. She didn't run. She just let them come close enough to hear her voice. She didn't shout. She didn't sob. Her voice was low, even stripped of anything but truth. "Consider your services terminated," she said. "You're no longer our bank." The words didn't land like an insult. They landed like a gravestone being lowered into place. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish, no sound coming out at first. Wyatt actually took a half step back, the hand that had pointed at her trembling before dropping uselessly to his side. Racism allegations viral. It felt like her veins were full of ice water. She'd spent years cultivating this branch's image, sending out glossy flyers about inclusive service, community ties, responsible banking. She trained Wyatt herself, taught him the pitch-perfect lines about valued customers and our commitment to service. And now, she let out a strangled noise that was half a sob and half a cough, turning to look at the big screen bolted to the lobby wall that usually ran gentle ads about savings accounts and retirement plans. Tonight, it displayed nothing but live news coverage. The headline crawled across the ticker in enormous white letters on blood-red background. Bank loses $5.9 billion client over racism allegations. Underneath it, a talking head explained in grim detail how the account holder, identified only as a local business owner, had accused staff of harassment and discrimination, culminating in the transfer of their entire institutional portfolio. Franklin was in the middle of that screen now, a blurry phone video of him shouting, "Clear her out," while security moved toward the camera. It had been played on loop all afternoon. Social media had run with it, of course. The video the teenagers shot outside had millions of views by sundown, the hateful caption replaced by stitches and duets that dissected every moment of humiliation Linnell endured. Every mocking voice in the line, every pleading "please," she'd whispered while they laughed. Victoria had turned off her phone to stop the notifications. She knew she'd see her own face in those videos too. She couldn't stand it. She couldn't even lie to herself about what they'd done. Behind her, Wyatt had fallen into a kind of silent, twitching despair, his fingers drumming erratically on the countertop until Victoria had snapped at him to stop, only for him to glare at her with raw, feral hatred. She'd told him to be careful with her tone. He'd told her to go to hell. Dalton had posted himself near the door, arms folded, eyes on the floor. He hadn't said a word in over an hour. The phone behind the counter rang again. Victoria flinched at the sound, but didn't move to answer it. Neither did Wyatt. It just kept ringing. Outside, through the glass walls, reporters had begun to gather, pressing against the windows with microphones and cameras, trying to shout questions about the transfer, the accusations, the impending collapse of their branch. Security had locked the doors, but they pounded anyway. The dull thump-thump-thump of the crowd's demands forming a steady heartbeat of dread that shook Victoria to her core. Upstairs, Franklin was screaming. They could hear it even here. He'd locked himself in the branch manager's office, bellowing into a conference call with the corporate office, voice cracking with the effort of blaming anyone he could. Victoria, Wyatt, the tellers, even the IT staff who had failed to stop the transfer. They all knew corporate wouldn't buy it. They'd seen the footage. They'd heard the audio. They knew exactly who'd humiliated her, who'd called security for everyone's safety, who'd told her to come back with someone to vouch. Franklin's words wouldn't save him. They might have saved him in the old days, when no one filmed, when these stories didn't go viral before dinner. But not now. Not tonight. By 10 o'clock, the internal memo hit every inbox in the region. It was short, clinical, effective immediately. Franklin Tate, Victoria Clay, Wyatt Griggs, Dalton Kersey, terminated for cause. No severance. No references. Immediate security escort. The moment she read it, Victoria felt her heart sink through the floor. She heard Wyatt swear, so loud it bounced off the marble walls, his voice cracking with real fear for the first time all day. Dalton just exhaled, slowly, before straightening to his full height, jaw set like a man preparing for an execution. Security arrived not long after. Two suited professionals with unreadable faces who didn't so much ask as instruct them to stand and gather their belongings. Wyatt fought it at first, screaming that he'd sue, that they couldn't do this, that he was following orders. Victoria didn't argue. She couldn't. She rose with robotic stiffness, her knees knocking together, and carefully picked up her purse with shaking hands. She glanced at the mirror behind the counter and barely recognized herself. The image staring back was pale, gaunt, eyes swollen from crying, makeup streaked. Dalton didn't resist. He just lifted his badge off his belt, handed it over without a word, and walked out with the others, his boots thumping on the tile with all the ceremony of a funeral march. Outside, cameras flashed as they were let out the door. Reporters jostled for position, microphones extended like bayonets, asking the same question over and over. Do you have anything to say about the allegations? Did you call her a scammer? Why didn't you just verify the account? Victoria couldn't answer. The words died in her mouth, her voice a dry rasp. Wyatt tried. He stammered, sputtered, cursed at them, only making it worse. Months had passed since the day the bank collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The scandal seared into the public memory not just as a financial disaster, but as a moral indictment that forced people to examine their own small cruelties, their own quiet participation in systems that lifted some while grinding others into dust. The footage had played over and over on the news. The moment Linnell was forced to sign again and again while they laughed, the moment security put a hand on her shoulder, the moment she stood on the sidewalk in tears while a teenager streamed her humiliation to the world. The bank had been sold off piecemeal, its assets gutted, its name now synonymous with shame. But it hadn't just ended there. Consequences had a way of rippling outward, touching everyone who thought they could walk away unscathed. Wyatt Griggs had disappeared for a while after the cameras caught him being escorted out of the branch with tears and snot on his face, his wild-eyed ranting only adding to the spectacle. For months no one saw him, and rumors spread that he'd moved back in with his parents in a rusted-out suburb, living off unemployment checks and quietly drinking himself sick. But that wasn't the whole story. On a damp spring morning, Wyatt sat cross-legged on the cheap linoleum floor of a community center basement, the walls covered in crayon drawings and motivational posters with fraying edges. A dozen kids sprawled around him with notebooks open in their laps. He held up a large laminated sheet showing big, looping cursive letters and smiled at them, awkwardly nervously, but genuinely. "Okay," he said, voice cracking in the silence. "So this is how you do it. Don't rush. Doesn't have to be perfect. A little girl with braids raised her hand. "Why do we have to write our names over and over?" she asked, frowning in confusion. Wyatt's mouth twisted. He looked at the sheet, then at the kids. He let out a breath. "Because it's yours," he said slowly, choosing each word like it weighed something. "Because it matters. Because no one should ever make you feel like you don't deserve to have it." He saw their eyes watching him, unblinking, and swallowed hard. "I used to make fun of someone for that," he admitted. "Made them write their name over and over while everyone laughed. I thought it was funny. I thought it was okay." His eyes shone with tears he refused to wipe away. It wasn't. It wasn't okay at all. Don't let anyone do that to you. Don't ever forget who you are. The kids didn't really understand the whole story, but they listened. They wrote their names carefully, tongues poking out in concentration, and Wyatt watched them with a look that was part regret, part fragile hope that maybe this counted for something. Elsewhere in the city, Victoria Clay sat alone in the echoing stillness of a meeting hall. It had once been a church basement, but now hosted community forums, rows of mismatched folding chairs facing a rickety podium. She sat at the edge of a stage, her blazer gone, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back into a severe bun that no longer seemed like armor but penitence. She watched the small crowd gather, people who'd come not to yell at her or hurl insults, though God knew she would have deserved it, but to hear her speak. She stood up slowly, her knees creaking, and took her place behind the podium. She gripped the edges until her knuckles went white, head lowered, eyes fixed on the scuffed floor. When she spoke, her voice was low, hoarse. "I didn't come here to defend myself," she began. She heard a chair scrape, someone leaning forward. She forced herself to look up. "I came here because I ruined my own life, and worse, I ruined someone else's day, her dignity, her trust. I thought I was better than her, because I wore better clothes, because I sat behind a counter, because I could make her prove herself. I thought it was funny when she begged." Her voice cracked. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, blinking rapidly. "I lost everything because I wouldn't treat her like a person, because I forgot she had a name. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't think you should. I'm asking you to hold me accountable. I'm asking you to help me make sure I never forget again." She swallowed hard, the words scraping her throat raw. "I'm working at the shelter now. I see women come in with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and I try to help them. Not because it fixes what I did, but because they deserve help. Because they deserve to be seen. Because she did. I didn't see her that day. I do now." A man in the front row shifted uncomfortably, but no one heckled. No one laughed. They just watched, the air thick with uncomfortable honesty. She lowered her eyes again. "I know that's not enough, but it's all I have." In the back of the room, a woman watched quietly, arms folded over her chest. She wore simple clothes, no fancy bag, no jewelry. She had an old phone in her pocket and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Victoria's voice breaking and the words tumbling out like a confession at the end of the world. She didn't speak. She didn't approach. She just listened. Outside, the city went on the way it always did. Cars honking, people rushing, phones buzzing with a million tiny cruelties and small kindnesses, the messy swirl of human lives grinding together. But something had shifted, even if no one wanted to admit it out loud. News anchors still occasionally referenced the meltdown as a cautionary tale. HR departments held workshops they'd never bothered with before. Bank branches updated their training manuals with the phrase, "Treat every client with dignity." People who'd once laughed at the viral video found themselves squirming in discomfort when they remembered it. And in a small apartment, Linnell Porter sat at her worn kitchen table, the folder of documents replaced by new contracts neatly filed, the new bank account, at a new institution, open without incident. She picked up her old flip phone and ran her thumb over the cracked hinge. Then she set it down, took a long, calming breath, and got back to work. Because her business still existed. Because her name was still hers. Because no one would make her prove it ever again. The end. If you've been following this story and felt the weight of every moment, every cruel laugh, every broken plea, every quiet act of reckoning, I'd love to know what you think. Did the ending surprise you? Did the characters feel real? Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and tell me how this story hit you, what part stuck with you most, or what twist you didn't see coming. If you want more stories that dive deep, challenge our assumptions, and refuse to look away from the hard truths, even as they deliver justice in the end, make sure to like this and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Your support helps keep these conversations going. Let's talk about it. Let's keep telling the stories that matter.